We've got a great webinar here this afternoon on CloudSuite data migration with two excellent presenters. So without further ado, I give you the CloudSuite data migration with Richard Lee Stout and Chip Cunningham. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks Bill. All right, so as you may know, we are RPI consultants. It is our mission in life to help our customers improve operations and enhance their systems by leveraging their technology investment to its maximum potential. We do this by hiring smart people who are passionate about what they do, and we listen to them, and we bring them into our culture of continuous improvement. And where that's brought us to today is a team of over 90 consultants and a lot of hands-on experience with CloudSuite, with global HR, with CloudSuite financials, on-prem, single-tenant, multi-tenant. We've come a long way, and in this webinar, we just want to focus down on some things that we've learned by doing data migrations as part of CloudSuite implementations. And we want to talk through some of the considerations that come into data migrations, such as what is the actual scope of data that should be migrated, and how do we decide what that is. We want to talk about how data migration fits into the overall project plan of a systems implementation. We talk about some of the actual techniques or methods that we've used. And then finally, we'll wrap up with data archive considerations, or what to do with data that didn't fit into our data migration scope.
So as far as data migration scope is concerned, I mean, one of the main drivers of what you migrate, how you migrate, when you migrate is the functional system design. Mm-hmm. So you want to migrate and map and move data into the system as you want it presented to the end user when they log in for the first time. Right. And a second a focus that you need to have is a focus on converting transactions needed for business continuity. And what we mean by that is, let's not convert every single thing from the system, but let's convert everything that you need moving forward from cutover day one onward.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our guiding principle when it comes to choosing what kind of data belongs in our data migration. Let's dive into some examples. So when we look at CloudSuite HCM or Global HR, for example, employee records. Well, typically we'll migrate all employee records, including all terminated employees. We're going to use that to determine, if we have a rehire or a new hire going forward in HCM. We'd bring over all active user fields attached with those employees as well. And when it comes to job codes and positions, well, that can really vary from one project to the next, depending on our job codes and positions set up in Lawson, and how solid are they? Are we doing some sort of HR organization redesign or restructuring as part of the project? So that could really be on a case-by-case basis.
Right, and employees, the employee load is actually going to drive that too, so as far as like historical data. So do we need to bring over every single job and position that's ever been in Lawson, or is there a cutoff point so we don't have to bring over a bunch of stuff that's probably not pertinent anymore? Yeah. Some people's systems are 20 years old, so do we want to bring all that stuff over?
Yeah, and when it comes to history, we know that migrating history can be problematic and time-consuming because history records might have dependencies on organizational components that might no longer be active, might not be part of our migration scope, and we don't want to have to build out, say, jobs or position codes that are no longer in use.
Yeah, just not going to be there anymore.
Right. So we look to minimize the amount of history that we bring over, understanding that there's some level, maybe a year or 2 years that might be just simply required for an HR department to maintain efficient operations.
Right.
So let's take a look at some examples in CloudSuite Financials. So financial supply management. We look at the GL chart, the actual chart structure, company, accounting units, accounts. That will probably look to bring over completely, especially to support the GL trans history that we're going to bring over. But there's most likely some transformation that's going on here, because one of the great advantages of CloudSuite Financials is the flexible GL structure. So chances are, as part of our implementation, we're doing some level of GL chart reorg or adding in some additional dimensions. And that's where our cross-reference mapping really becomes key to support that transformation from the old chart to the new chart. So we'll look to bring in our final new chart along with mapping back to the old chart. When we look at GL trans, that would typically bring in detail, maybe 1 or 2 years of complete GL trans. But then when it comes to subsystem data, we look to minimize subsystem transactions to really only what's needed for open or active records, so that way we can continue processing on day 1 of go live. So for example, AP invoices, optimally, we're just bringing over current or open records. And then when it comes to the vendor master, we'll bring over the vendors that are needed for those invoice records, as well as say, maybe everything that all new vendors that have been added in the past year and are active have at least an invoice against them or something. So we look to create this criteria as part of the design phase of our project. And as you mentioned, it's sort of led by the functional design.
As far as some of the prerequisites for data migration, these are real important, especially data cleanup. It's hard. Your data that you migrate over is only going to be as good or as clean as the data that you're coming from. So if you have the opportunity, or you can get out there and clean the data, sync up codes, get rid of stuff that's not needed anymore, then that's just going to make your migration smoother. It's going to make it less painless. One of the other things you want to do is you want to standardize your codes. So if you're using, there's drivers on the GHR side in particular that determine what the values of certain fields need to be, what certain codes need to be on the S3 side. So if you're going to rework those codes, it's good to do it ahead of time so that it's not like double and triple work when you're doing the actual migration. Anything you can do to set yourself up for success, you want to do beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to, say, sub-accounts on the CloudSuite Financial side, if each sub-account that's in use is used consistently across every account it's attached to, if it means the same thing for every account it's attached to, as part of the CloudSuite Financial migration, we can easily break out sub-account to its own dimension. But if, say, sub-account 10 means one thing when it's attached to this account, or a totally different thing when sub-account 10 is attached to a different account, that makes it really challenging to migrate that in to CloudSuite Financials. Right. And then just another consideration as part of our data migration scope is we might have data that's not stored in Lawson today that has to become part of each and every data migration pass. That might be, say, something like positions, which might be a new type of structure. Perhaps, positions aren't required in Lawson HR. Perhaps we're not using them in Lawson HR, but they are required for global HR, so they get created and maybe built offline and then converted in as part of a pass. Or perhaps we're implementing a new module as part of our overall implementation. Say, we're moving global HR and implementing benefits, and we're not using S3 benefits. In which case, we're converting in, benefit enrollments, maybe from some other system.
Yeah, it's important to note that you're getting this new system. You want to take full advantage of the new capabilities. You don't want to just grab what you've got and put it in the new system you're getting, because then you may not get all those benefits from the new system.
Yeah, friends don't let friends lift and shift.
That's a saying. that's a real saying.
It is.
Okay.
Copyright 2018, Richard Lee Stout.
There you go.
Let's dig into migration passes and sort of how they fit into the overall implementation project. So here we have a diagram of an actual global HR project plan. The columns are the phases, and each box is a segment of work or a milestone or a deliverable. And in our global HR implementation, we'll have several migration passes scheduled at different points during the project. And the migration passes are generally scheduled to support the needs of a testing round. So we have various rounds of testing that have different objectives. So we have a migration pass that's geared towards setting the stage for that round of testing.
And one of the other things that we do as part of kind of the planning phase is develop a product line strategy. In the simplest terms, a product line strategy is what part of the project am I at, and where is the data during that part of the project. It's important to define this because we usually offer up a pristine data area, and the pristine data area is the start of everything. It's the base code and all of the non-changing data. It's got to go into systems to be able to come out of the system. So, defining what that pristine area is, making sure that we understand that nobody can go in there and change data. As far as development, we want to be able to give a spot where the developers can go in and create new flows or new processes or new action requests, kind of without having to worry about somebody coming and wiping it out. Mm-hmm. So the product line strategy basically it is like the cornerstone of your migration plan.
So let's see that in action. When we're going to perform a data migration pass, basically we need to start by clearing the data area that we're going to begin working in. We do that by refreshing it from pristine down into the conversion target data area. Pristine holds our approved configuration, so our base setup of the application, but has no transactional data in it. So that basically lays down our base configuration and gives us a place that we're able to load our conversions into. So we'll perform our data migration, loading data into our target data area, and then that gives us our area to conduct a round of testing. So data migrations are an iterative improvement, right? So each time we're taking a data migration pass, we're improving our execution of that pass, improving the quality and data validity that we get on the other side. And basically we're building up to a process that's been proven out and can be executed during go live without issue.
Yeah, it's gonna, the first time you migrate data, it's gonna be rough.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have your trials. Generally the client hasn't seen the system yet, so they don't understand what they're agreeing to during the migration. So as they get into the system, as they decide, hey, I want this here, you're gonna have to change the way that you migrate the data. So each pass will improve until hopefully the third pass is a very close to go live pass.
Yeah, particularly off of that first pass, right? Which is we anticipate issues, so we do a limited pass the very first time, just to build out the system to a point where we can conduct unit testing, or also known as conference room pilot.
Yep.
Hey Chip, we talked about data refreshing from pristine down into our target environment. what are some things that we might add into Pristine to help save some time as part of a data migration?
I feel like that's a softball, really. Pristine is approved configuration, but you can also utilize Pristine as a spot to put things that are never going to change, like old historic supervisor codes that nobody's going to change, or old jobs or old things that just aren't going to change, or in an inactive state that you may need that you may need for historic type transaction data. And the reason we do this is because anything that you can push off from the go live date is going to improve on your downtime. It's going to lessen your downtime and lessen your risks and your how it interacts with the users and how the users feel the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. So our data migration passes throughout the project lead up to the ultimate data migration pass, and that is go live. We have a very detailed go live plan that we'll work from over that period, and that plan gets built basically from the output of all the previous migration passes that we've done on the project. So we learn from every pass, we improve every pass, and along the way we're building out our plan of every single step that needs to happen to execute and validate go live.
Right, and sometimes what you learn along the way is that maybe you can load your jobs a week early, or you can load your positions a week early. You can copy Pristine down a week early. Things that we can maybe freeze in the system.
Yeah, stuff that's not really dynamic.
Right, we can maybe work up to the final cutover, which is loading all of your transactions in the system. So it's usually go live is like a week-long process.
Yeah, because we want to strike that balance between minimizing the sort of risky downtime maneuvers, but also reducing the amount of dual maintenance that might need to happen.
Yeah.
Right. So like when it comes to say users and security, we don't want to ask our clients to have to dual maintain every new user account in the system for 6 months.
Right.
We want to set up security refresh or synchronization, in the days or weeks leading up to go live. Cool. So let's dive into some specific techniques that we use to get data out of a source system, to transform it into the format needed for CloudSuite, and then finally to load it into CloudSuite in a timely manner. One of the most important facets of this is knowing the source of truth for your data mapping. And ultimately, the data mapping lives with the client, right? The client has ownership over the data mapping.
Right.
There are a few different places that we have to store a data mapping, and we certainly want to establish this early on in the planning of the project. Is who's going to have access to it? Who needs to change it? Who needs to see it? And where it's going to live. Right within CloudSuite, we do have a couple of different places we can use to store data mappings. There are application cross-references, such as in CloudSuite Financials. We have the organization codes, business class. We have the account codes, business class. And those are equivalent to your GL08 and GL09 in Lawson S3. And then over in IPA, there are cross-reference tables that are used. And when it comes to global HR, those cross-reference tables are actually functional because they're relied on by the GHR to S3 interface.
Right. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. You're pulling data out to map into GHR. Why not use the mapping that's already there?
Yeah, and we can extend that mapping with Configuration Console if the fields that are delivered are not enough or not the right fields for your specific use case.
Right. Some cases it's in some cases like HR organization unit comes to mind as a good example that you'll have to use that HR organization unit. So a serial number. There's a serial number that gets assigned when you load it into the system. So on your later conversion, you'll have to use that. So it's necessary to put the data into the system, then query it back out of the system, and then utilize it on further conversions down the road. So there is sometimes that extra added step to make sure you're using the correct codes and numbers.
So those are those long GUIDs that we see, right?
Yep.
Yeah, those get auto-generated by the system, and maybe detail records that need to reference them that we're loading up. So we have a number of tools at our disposal to actually load data into CloudSuite. So let's talk through each one and maybe just see what's an example or what might be an appropriate use case for each of these tools.
Yeah, so Spreadsheet Designer is a great tool. It's like, it's add-ins for
Landmark.
For Landmark. So, you can load your data using Spreadsheet Designer. So it goes into an Excel spreadsheet, and it calls APIs into the Landmark application and loads the data in. It's a great tool for small sets of data. So, for example, jobs, where you may have 500 jobs or 1,000 organization units or whatever. But when it comes to loading, employees or historic work assignments or anything like that, you want to kind of steer clear there because it's going to take a lot longer.
Yeah, Spreadsheet Designer is a business analyst-oriented type tool. It's great for exploratory data manipulation, but for larger jobs, it might not be the most appropriate tool to use.
And then there's the import interface business class. So with each application, there's a set of imports. For GHR, it's like the employee import, or it's the work assignment import. Those are all standard business classes that allow you to load the data up into a staging table and then perform actions on the data and pull it into the system. It does all your error checking for you. It spits out errors. It works really well. And the reason you'd use this is because you can use the DB import command to load into these business classes is much faster than Spreadsheet Designer.
Yeah. So this is equivalent to your transaction interface or load batch job. So we'd have an S3, right? So like the GL165 in S3, there's a one-for-one equivalent to that in CloudSuite Financials. It's called GL Transaction Interface. It works pretty similar. And that's a great way to rapidly load a lot of data into the system, but still using sort of an established application process to do so, rather than directly inserting into live tables.
And one of the tools that I use, like for every GHR migration I do, is the LTMFL spreadsheets. They're distributed by Infor. They give you all the fields. They give you possible values for those fields. They give you a little field definition. It not only helps me keep things organized, but it helps the clients understand what they're loading as we kind of go through the requirements gathering stage.
And finally, we've got DB import, or as it's named in the actual menu, import to database.
Yeah.
So what this is pretty equivalent to import DB in Lawson, right? It particularly interesting when we look at a multi-tenant scenario, because even if we have staging or conversion tables that we need to load, we can't do direct database inserts into them, and we can't just we don't have lid, right? So we can't just transfer a file up to the application server and then run command line commands to load the data. But CloudSuite has this capability called import to database, and basically how it works is you'll set up a source SFTP server that it will pull data from, and then you'll go and initiate your import to database job. You say what the target business class is, give it some parameters about the file that you're looking to load, like is it a delimited file, how is it laid out. And then it will use your SFTP server configuration to go out, open a connection to an SFTP server that could be either on-prem or in some other cloud, deployment, and it'll retrieve the file, transfer the file into CloudSuite, and then execute that load to populate the target business class with data. And then it produces a nice output report and lets us know how it went. So for high volume transaction conversions, maybe none of those tools are going to be fast enough to manipulate millions of rows of data, particularly if there's heavy data transformation. So we'll look to automate out any high volume transaction. So for example, if we're doing a detailed GL-trans load that might have a couple of million rows, and we've done some pretty heavy GL chart reorg. So maybe added some dimensions, and we have a pretty complex data mapping scenario. We'll build out an automation for that. And for example, we've used SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, to connect to the source database, which in our case would be like Lawson 9 or Lawson 10. Make an ODBC connection to that source database, pull the data out, and load that into our conversions database. Our conversions database is where we actually execute our mapping, and we've refreshed our mapping tables in there for our mapping source of truth. Once our conversion is executed, we'll write the results out to a CSV file, and then we'll use that import to database function to pull the CSV file off of an SFTP server, and then actually DB import it into our target business class. All of these steps happen in under an hour for millions of rows. This can all happen extremely rapidly, and that includes the transfer time between the on-prem source system and the AWS hosted CloudSuite. Okay, finally we'll wrap up with some data archive considerations. So this comes into play when, say, you're running Lawson and maybe you have a hosted system, and you're looking to move to full CloudSuite solution and ultimately shut down our hosted Lawson application. What if we have 10 or 20 years of history in Lawson? We obviously don't want to put all of that data into CloudSuite. So where do we store and retrieve this data so that way if we need to do historical lookups, we have access to it? So we have a bunch of different options, basically. There are a handful of delivered business classes right within the CloudSuite solutions that can hold archive data. For example, in CloudSuite Financials, there is a sort of legacy GL-trans table that we can use. Of course, we have the ability to create our own business classes with Configuration Console. So an advantage to building out a new business class to hold historical data versus just straight up converting that historical data is we don't have all the dependencies on related records, right? So if it's in a separate business class, we could sort of control what that data validation logic is. And in that way, we hold the data in a central place, and with CloudSuite, of course, we don't have to worry about backups or uptime. That's all handled by the cloud. And then our end users enjoy the ability to have one sort of entry point where they can work with active transactions as well as view and inquire on historical transactions. Of course, one of the easiest ways to maintain an archive of historical data is simply maintain the last backup of your Lawson database. Maybe you've got an Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server that holds the final backup of Lawson S3 sort of as it existed in your live Lawson environment. And although you won't have an application overlaying that you can use to inquire on, we can use reporting or database-based exploration and lookup tools to solve any query needs that come up. So we can create a handful of reports for our most common data inquiry scenarios, and then anything more complicated than that, bring in a business analyst to assist for one-off complex ad hoc queries. And I just want to round out this topic by saying that, of course, we have clients that maintain already an enterprise data warehouse on-prem, so that could be a great location to hold historical sort of non-converted data. And then the Infor CloudSuite solution comes with Infor Data Lake, which is similar to a data warehouse. It's an unstructured data repository in the cloud, and that can also be a great sort of parking spot for data that we need to hold but don't really want to make part of our CloudSuite application.
Yeah, I mean, it's important when you go through these to figure out up front what your real needs are in the system.
Yeah, so all this generally happens during the design phase
Right.
of our project. We identify where this is gonna live. A lot of different factors based upon the systems that a client might already have in place that they might want to leverage for this. So with that, we'll close it out and take any questions that you might have.
Yes, we do have one question. Coming in, it says, we do mass pay increases in LTM via ISD, and these take hours. Are you saying that this could be completed via DB import or into an interface business class?
The interface business classes are specifically only built for certain things. As far as importing it into using DA import, that's kind of tricky. What I would look to do is, maybe a flow or maybe something other than ISD with lots of employee records and a complicated action like pay increase. It's going to take a while.
I am speaking out of my depth here, but I believe Global HR has some actual application functionality to help with pay rates, right?
Yeah, there are mass pay increases, but if they do it, if they don't do it in a structured way, like everybody gets a 5% increase. So,
Okay. Yeah, we could maybe follow up with a one-on-one conversation after to dive into the details here, but on the face of it, spreadsheet designer is probably the obvious choice actually for that.
Yeah.